The resort gates opened at 9 sharp, and the first guests walked straight onto my land. The HOA had built a $12 million lake resort across my shoreline, my pasture, and my private access road, and now cameras were flashing while Olivia Grant cut a blue ribbon in front of 200 residents. Music bounced off the water. Champagne glasses clicked under a white event tent. Golf carts rolled past cabins that should never have existed. Every dock, cabin, utility trench, and driveway depended on the deed, survey line, and title chain sitting inside my briefcase. Olivia smiled for the local news like she had won. That was her first mistake. She thought opening day made the theft permanent. I stood near the back of the crowd with dust on my boots and a folder under my arm. The lake glittered behind the clubhouse. Fresh cedar railings smelled sharp in the heat. A banner stretched over the entrance. Willow Ridge Lake Resort Grand Opening. Beneath it, families posed for pictures. Contractors shook hands. Board members slapped each other on the back like they had built a monument. Maybe they had. Just not on land they owned. My name is Mason Reed. I am 46 years old, and the ground under that resort had been in my family longer than Willow Ridge Estates had existed. My grandfather ran cattle along that shore. My father fixed fence lines there. I learned to drive an old pickup along the same gravel cut where Olivia's valet stand now blocked traffic. I never wanted a fight with the HOA. I lived outside their boundary. I paid no dues. I followed no paint color rules. That should have made me invisible to them. Instead, they treated my land like empty space waiting for their imagination. For months earlier, I heard machines before sunrise. A low diesel growl came over the hill. Then came the metallic scrape of steel teeth biting into rock. I walked down toward the lake with coffee still burning my tongue and found excavators tearing into the north shoreline. Orange flags lined my pasture. Survey stakes dotted the grass. A crew was trenching for utilities beside my old cattle road. The air smelled like wet clay, diesel, and cut cedar. One worker waved like I was visiting their job site. I asked who approved the work. He pointed toward a temporary trailer near the ridge. Olivia stepped out before I reached it. Cream blazer. Perfect hair. Clipboard tucked against her chest. "Mr. Reed," she said, "this area has always served the community." I looked past her at the excavator bucket swinging over my fence line. "Serving the community is not the same as belonging to it." Her smile did not move. Behind her, a truck unloaded lumber beside my lake. "You are confused," she said. "Our attorneys reviewed everything." That word everything landed wrong. People who have everything rarely say it that fast. Then I noticed the first survey stake had my family's old boundary mark written on the side. The mark was faded, but I recognized it instantly. My grandfather had carved that boundary symbol into dozens of posts around the property. Seeing it on a survey stake planted by a construction crew made my stomach tighten. Olivia followed my gaze. For a second, her smile flickered. Then it returned. She told me their consultants had already verified everything. Behind her, another truck rolled in carrying steel beams. The project was moving fast. That detail mattered. Every hour added more money to the site. Every day made the mistake larger. I left without arguing. The sound of machinery followed me all the way back to my truck. Dust drifted across the pasture. The smell of diesel lingered in the warm air. By noon, I was standing inside the county records office. Old paper and floor polish filled the building. A clerk pointed me toward the property archive terminals. I started pulling maps. Then tax records. Then parcel histories. The deeper I went, the less sense the HOA story made. A boundary adjustment appeared in one file but vanished in another. An easement was referenced but never fully described. One page led to 3 more questions. That was the first thread. I kept pulling. 2 days later, I hired an independent surveyor named Ben Foster. Ben had spent 30 years working land disputes across the state. He was not impressed by expensive developments or confident board presidents. He trusted measurements. Nothing else. We Met at sunrise beside the lake. Fog floated low over the water. Ben unloaded equipment, while geese moved across the shoreline. He worked quietly. Every few minutes he checked coordinates and compared them to historical records. Around noon, he stopped talking altogether. That caught my attention. Ben was not the type to stay silent without a reason. He stared toward the active construction site for several seconds. Then he looked back at me. "How much of that project do they think belongs to them?" he asked. I pointed toward the cabins, the future clubhouse, and the marina excavation. His expression hardened. He returned to his equipment without another word. The next morning, he called me before breakfast. His voice sounded different. More careful. More focused. He asked me to meet him immediately. When I arrived, survey flags stretched across the shoreline like a line of warning lights. The construction crews were already working. Nail guns echoed through the air. Hammers rang against steel brackets. Ben handed me a preliminary map. A red boundary line cut directly through the center of the development. The line crossed the marina basin. It crossed the clubhouse footprint. It crossed nearly every major structure planned for the project. The scale of the problem hit me all at once. This was not a fence dispute. This was not a few feet of encroachment. The entire development appeared to be standing in the wrong place. Across the lake, Olivia's team continued building as if nothing had changed. Then Ben pointed toward one specific notation on the map. Ben tapped the notation with one finger. The paper crackled in the morning breeze. Construction noise drifted across the shoreline behind us. "This is the problem," he said. The notation referenced a survey filed decades earlier. Most people would have ignored it. Most people would never have seen it. The line connected to an older boundary description that did not match the records being used for the resort project. I looked across the water. Crews were already framing the main lodge. Nail guns snapped in rapid bursts. Forklifts moved pallets of materials along temporary gravel roads. The project seemed to grow. Every time I looked away, Ben folded the map carefully. "You need the historical records," he said. "Not summaries. Not recent copies. The originals." That afternoon I drove back to the county archives. The building was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight near the windows. I requested every document tied to the shoreline parcel. One file became 3. 3 became 10. Hours passed. The smell of old paper filled the room. Then I found something unusual. A transfer record referenced an earlier deed book that had never appeared in the digital system. The clerk frowned when she saw the entry. She disappeared into a storage room and returned carrying a thick volume with worn leather binding. The pages were yellow and fragile. I turned them carefully. Halfway through the book, I found the shoreline description. My pulse quickened. The language was detailed, specific, precise. More important, it matched the boundary location identified by Ben. I copied every page. Outside, evening sunlight reflected off the courthouse windows. The evidence was starting to align. The next morning I met with a property attorney named Sarah Whitaker. Her office overlooked the town square. Framed maps covered the walls. She listened without interrupting while I explained the survey results and the archive records. Then she studied the copies for nearly 20 minutes. The room remained silent except for the turning of pages. Finally she leaned back in her chair. "If these records hold up," she said, "the situation is much larger than anyone realizes." Those words stayed with me. Larger than anyone realizes. Over the next week, Sarah helped assemble a complete title chain. Every document led to another. Every record strengthened the same conclusion. Meanwhile, the resort kept expanding. New cabins appeared along the shoreline. Fresh concrete cured beneath temporary barriers. Decorative stone entrances rose near the access road. Olivia seemed determined to move even faster. Local newspapers published glowing articles about economic growth and tourism opportunities. Residents praised the project online. Some called it the future of the Community. Nobody mentioned ownership. Nobody questioned the location. One evening I drove past the site just before sunset. Golden light covered the lake. Workers packed up for the day. The nearly finished lodge reflected across the water. It looked impressive. Expensive. Permanent. Olivia stood near the shoreline speaking with contractors. She noticed my truck and smiled. It was the same smile from the construction trailer. Confident. Certain. As if every question had already been answered. Then my phone rang. It was Sarah. Her voice sounded sharper than usual. She had just found something buried inside the title chain. Sarah asked me to come to her office immediately. The sun was already dropping behind the courthouse when I arrived. Long shadows stretched across the square. Traffic moved slowly outside. Inside, her conference table was covered with copies of deeds, surveys, title records, and county maps. She slid a document toward me. The paper looked ordinary. The date was not. The record was older than every document the HOA had been relying on. "Read the shoreline description," she said. I followed the language line by line. The wording matched the original boundary markers. It matched Ben's survey. It matched the records I had pulled from the archive. More importantly, it directly contradicted the ownership assumptions supporting the resort project. Sarah tapped a paragraph near the bottom of the page. "This never disappeared," she said. "It was never replaced. It was never extinguished. It stayed in the chain the entire time." Outside the window, courthouse lights flickered on. I looked back at the document. Months of construction suddenly felt different. The project no longer looked powerful. It looked exposed. But paperwork alone was not enough. Everything had to be verified. Everything had to survive scrutiny. Over the next several weeks, Sarah and I worked methodically. We ordered certified copies. We reviewed historical transfers. We compared survey descriptions from different decades. Every path led to the same conclusion. The ownership record remained intact. Meanwhile, the resort continued growing. New roofs appeared along the shoreline. Landscaping crews planted rows of ornamental trees. Stone walkways curved toward the lake. Advertising signs appeared along nearby highways. The HOA was no longer building a development. They were building a destination. One Saturday morning, I drove past the property entrance. A giant rendering stood beside the road. Families stopped to look at it. Future visitors took photographs. The image showed luxury cabins, private docks, waterfront dining, and sunset views across the lake. The caption called it the future of Willow Ridge. I stared at the picture for a long moment. The real shoreline sat directly behind it. The same shoreline described in the documents stacked on Sarah's table. A week later, the HOA hosted a community presentation. Residents packed the clubhouse. Olivia stood at the front of the room beneath bright lights and a giant projection screen. Applause filled the hall when she announced construction milestones. The crowd seemed impressed. Investors appeared impressed. Even some county officials attended. I remained near the back wall and listened. Olivia spoke confidently about progress, tourism, and growth. She never mentioned ownership. She never mentioned the survey. She never mentioned the older records. At one point her eyes met mine across the room. She paused for only a second before continuing. The presentation ended with another round of applause. Outside, warm evening air drifted across the parking lot. Crickets chirped from nearby fields. People left smiling and optimistic. I stood beside my truck watching headlights disappear into the darkness. The project felt unstoppable from the outside. That was exactly what made the next discovery so important. The following morning, Ben called before sunrise. He had found something attached to the original survey. Ben sounded wide awake despite the hour. The sky outside my window was still dark when I answered. He told me he had located an attachment referenced by the original survey. Not a separate survey. Not a later correction. An attachment. Something that traveled with the document from the beginning. 30 minutes later, I met him at his office. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Coffee steamed from a paper cup beside a stack of maps. Ben spread several documents across the table. Then he pointed toward a handwritten notation attached to the original filing. The ink had faded with age. The meaning had not. The note identified physical markers placed along the shoreline decades earlier. Not estimated markers. Not temporary references. Permanent boundary markers. Several still existed. That changed everything. By mid-morning, we were back at the lake. Clouds hung low over the water. The air smelled like wet grass and cedar mulch. Construction crews continued working despite the drizzle. A crane slowly lifted roofing materials onto the main lodge. Nobody paid attention to us. Ben carried old photographs and coordinate notes. We moved carefully through brush and trees near the northern edge of the property. Then we found the first marker. A rusted iron pin protruded from the ground beside an old oak tree. It matched the records exactly. Ben photographed it. Measured it. Logged it. We found another before noon. Then another. Each one strengthened the same conclusion. The original survey had not been wrong. The markers had been there the entire time. The resort was not drifting across a disputed line. It was sitting deep inside it. That afternoon, Sarah reviewed the new findings. Her response was immediate. She ordered certified documentation for every recovered marker. She wanted the record airtight. No assumptions. No shortcuts. Meanwhile, the project accelerated again. New advertisements appeared online. Promotional videos showed smiling families walking beside the lake. Reservations opened for future guests. The development was becoming a business before my eyes. Every week brought another announcement. Every announcement brought more attention. One evening, a certified letter arrived in my mailbox. The return address belonged to a law firm representing the HOA. I opened it at my kitchen table. Rain rattled softly against the windows. The letter accused me of interfering with progress. It suggested that my claims lacked merit. It encouraged me to stop contacting contractors connected to the project. I read it twice. Then I handed it to Sarah the next morning. She barely reacted. "This was expected," she said. She filed it with the rest of the records. The folder was growing thicker. The project was growing larger. Both sides were moving forward. The difference was that only one side appeared to understand the entire picture. Summer heat arrived as construction entered its final phase. Fresh landscaping lined the entrance roads. Decorative lights illuminated pathways near the shoreline. The main lodge stood fully enclosed. From a distance, it looked finished. Olivia began appearing in local interviews. She talked about economic benefits, community pride, future growth. Her confidence never wavered. Then Sarah called late one afternoon. The title chain review had finally reached its conclusion. What she found was even stronger than the survey markers. Sarah spread the final title report across her desk and turned it toward me. Afternoon sunlight reflected off the glass behind her. The stack of supporting documents was nearly 4 inches thick. Every survey transfer, easement reference, and historical record had been reviewed. Every path led to the same conclusion. The ownership chain never broke. Not once. Sarah pointed to a section near the center of the report. The shoreline parcel remained attached to my property through every transfer recorded over several decades. No valid conveyance moved it elsewhere. No correction removed it. No legal action changed it. The land beneath the resort still belonged to me. For a moment the office was completely quiet. The air conditioner hummed softly overhead. Traffic moved outside below the windows. Months of questions suddenly had answers. But answers alone would not stop a resort already preparing for guests. Sarah understood that. She closed the report and looked directly at me. "Now we move carefully," she said. That phrase stayed with me. Careful mattered. The project was attracting investors, contractors, residents, and county attention. One mistake could distract from the facts. A few days later, formal notices were prepared. Every document was supported by certified records. Every claim referenced evidence. Nothing relied on assumptions. The package went out to the HOA, their attorneys, and several parties connected to the project. Then we waited. The response arrived faster than expected. Olivia's legal team rejected the conclusions completely. They claimed the development had been built in good faith. They questioned portions of the survey work. They suggested the records could be interpreted differently. None of that surprised Sarah. "They are protecting the project," she said. "That does not mean they are right." Meanwhile, construction reached its final stages. Decorative lighting illuminated the shoreline after dark. Landscapers installed the last sections of sod near the main lodge. Workers cleaned pathways and installed signage. The place looked ready for magazine photographs. One evening I parked near a public overlook across the water. The resort glowed against the lake. Reflections shimmered across the surface. Guests would have called it beautiful. Investors would have called it valuable. I saw something different. I saw survey markers hidden beneath expensive landscaping. I saw boundary lines buried beneath concrete and stone. The scale of the mistake was becoming impossible to ignore. Another week passed. Then another. Local newspapers announced a grand opening date. Promotional advertisements appeared everywhere. Social media pages filled with countdown posts. Excitement spread across the community. Olivia appeared in interviews almost daily. Her confidence seemed stronger than ever. She spoke about the future. Growth. Opportunity. Success. She never mentioned ownership. She never mentioned the title chain. She never mentioned the certified records sitting inside Sarah's office. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Representatives connected to the project requested a private discussion. The room felt tense from the moment it started. Coffee sat untouched on the table. Nobody wasted time on small talk. Their side wanted compromise. Their side wanted flexibility. Their side wanted certainty before opening day arrived. Sarah listened carefully. Then she placed one certified document on the table. Silence followed immediately. The conversation shifted after that. Faces changed. Questions changed. The confidence in the room changed. When the meeting ended, one thing became clear. They finally understood the risk. But the opening date remained on the calendar. The opening date arrived with perfect weather. The sky was clear. The lake reflected bright morning sunlight like polished glass. By 7 o'clock, vendors were setting up tents along the shoreline. Delivery trucks moved in and out of the property. Staff members hurried between cabins carrying supplies and decorations. From a distance, the place looked like a success story already written. I parked on a small rise overlooking the water and watched the activity below. The smell of fresh-cut grass drifted through the air. Music checks echoed from speakers near the main lodge. Every few minutes another vehicle arrived. Investors. Residents. Local officials. Reporters. The crowd kept growing. A month earlier, that would have surprised me. Now it felt inevitable. Olivia had spent months building excitement. She had convinced people they were witnessing the future. Judging by the turnout, many believed her. Around mid-morning, Sarah called. Her voice remained calm as always. All final filings were prepared. Every supporting document had been organized. Every survey, title record, certified copy, and historical reference was ready. Nothing had been left to chance. We reviewed the schedule one last time. Then the call ended. Below me, applause suddenly erupted near the entrance. The ceremony was beginning. Olivia stepped onto a temporary stage beside the shoreline. Bright banners moved gently in the breeze behind her. Cameras pointed toward the platform. She looked completely confident. She thanked residents. She praised community leaders. She congratulated investors. Every few sentences brought another round of applause. I listened from a distance. The words carried across the water. None of them changed the documents sitting inside Sarah's office. None of them moved a boundary line by a single inch. The contrast felt almost surreal. On one side stood celebration. On the other stood evidence. A little later, guests began touring the property. Golf carts moved constantly along paved pathways. Families explored the docks. Visitors photographed the cabins. Children tossed breadcrumbs toward ducks near the shoreline. The entire development appeared alive for the first time. Yet something else had changed since the private meeting described by Sarah. The HOA representatives were smiling less. I noticed it immediately. Their movements seemed more cautious. Their conversations seemed shorter. Several times I saw attorneys speaking quietly with board members away from the main crowd. They knew the risk now. Maybe not the outcome, but definitely the risk. Late in the afternoon, I walked near a public viewing area outside the resort entrance. Nobody paid much attention to me. That was fine. I preferred it. A local reporter stood nearby interviewing visitors about the project. Excitement dominated every conversation. Economic growth. Tourism. Property values. Future expansion. The same themes repeated again and again. Then a black sedan pulled into the parking area. Sarah stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. She spotted me and nodded once. No smile. No dramatic speech. Just a simple acknowledgement. Everything was ready. The sun began sinking lower over the lake. Golden reflections stretched across the water. Music continued drifting through the evening air. Guests celebrated. Olivia greeted supporters beside the lodge entrance. The resort looked unstoppable. Then Sarah handed me a copy of the final filing timestamp. The timestamp showed exactly what Sarah wanted it to show. The filing had been accepted and recorded. Every supporting document was attached. Every survey reference was included. Every certified copy was preserved in the record. The moment I saw the confirmation, a strange calm settled over me. Around us, the celebration continued. Music drifted across the shoreline. Guests moved between cabins carrying drinks and brochures. Laughter echoed from the dock area. Nobody looking at the resort that evening would have guessed what had just happened. That contrast stayed with me. On one side stood months of construction, marketing, and confidence. On the other stood a filing built from facts. Sarah slipped the document back into her portfolio. Now we let the process work, she said. We left shortly after sunset. The lake disappeared into darkness behind us. Decorative lights reflected across the water. The development looked almost unreal from the road. Bright. Expensive. Finished. Yet the most important part of the story was no longer happening at the shoreline. It was happening inside court records and legal files. The next morning, local coverage focused entirely on the opening celebration. Photographs filled social media. Articles praised the investment. Residents posted pictures from the docks and walking paths. Olivia appeared everywhere. Interviews. Community pages. Promotional videos. She looked completely at ease. If she had concerns, she did not show them publicly. Several days passed. Visitors continued arriving. Reservations increased. New announcements appeared online. The project seemed determined to build momentum before questions could catch up with it. Meanwhile, Sarah and I continued preparing. Additional records were organized. Witness statements were reviewed. Survey materials were indexed. Ben verified every measurement again. Nothing was left unfinished. One afternoon I visited his office. Maps covered nearly every available surface. Colored markers traced property lines across multiple generations of records. Ben pointed toward the shoreline section. "This is still the strongest part," he said. The boundary evidence remained remarkably consistent. Decade after decade. Survey after survey. Marker after marker. The facts never moved. That mattered. Outside, summer heat shimmered above the pavement. Inside, the evidence kept growing stronger. A few days later, another development occurred. Several contractors connected to the project requested copies of public filings. Then suppliers did the same. Word was beginning to spread beyond the HOA board. People who had invested time and money wanted answers. Questions started appearing in places where questions had not existed before. Olivia responded publicly by projecting confidence. She continued speaking about future phases and expansion opportunities. Yet the tone felt slightly different now. More careful. More measured. Even local reporters seemed to notice. One evening Sarah called and asked me to stop by her office. The courthouse square was nearly empty when I arrived. Streetlights cast long reflections across the sidewalk. She had several new documents waiting on her desk. Across the top sat a notice connected to the upcoming proceedings. We reviewed every page together. The process was moving forward exactly as expected. No shortcuts. No surprises. Just evidence meeting procedure. When I left the office, the town felt unusually quiet. The resort lights glowed in the distance beyond the lake. For the first time, the final confrontation no longer felt hypothetical. The hearing date was closer than anyone realized. The hearing morning arrived under a gray sky. Rain tapped softly against the courthouse windows as people filtered through the entrance. The hallway smelled like coffee, wet jackets, and old paper. Sarah carried 2 organized binders. Ben carried survey exhibits. I carried the same briefcase that had been with me since opening day. The room itself felt smaller than I expected. Quiet conversations faded as everyone took their seats. Olivia sat with her attorneys across the aisle. She looked composed. Professional. Confident. Yet something was different. The certainty I had seen during construction was gone. The judge entered. The proceedings began. Hours of preparation suddenly narrowed into a series of questions, records, and explanations. Sarah moved carefully. Every statement pointed to evidence. Every claim connected to a document. Survey maps appeared first. Then certified records. Then historical filings. Ben explained the recovered markers. He described measurements. Coordinates. Physical locations. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. The room remained remarkably quiet. Then Sarah introduced the title chain. One document led to another. Decades of ownership unfolded piece by piece. Transfer after transfer. Record after record. The pattern never changed. The shoreline parcel remained attached to my property throughout the entire chain. Olivia's attorneys challenged portions of the evidence. Sarah responded with certified copies. They questioned interpretations. She answered with historical references. The process felt methodical rather than emotional. That mattered. This was never about anger. It was about ownership. Late in the afternoon, Sarah opened the final binder. I recognized it immediately. The original deed. The same document that had appeared in fragments throughout months of research. The same document hidden beneath assumptions, summaries, and overlooked records. She handed it to the court. Pages turned. Silence settled over the room. Even the attorneys across the aisle stopped writing for a moment. The language was clear. The boundary description matched the survey. The survey matched the markers. The markers matched the title chain. Every separate piece now pointed to the same conclusion. The judge spent several minutes reviewing the record. Nobody spoke. Rain continued tapping softly against the courthouse windows. Finally, the judge looked up and began summarizing the findings. The explanation was measured. Professional. Direct. The ownership evidence was consistent. The title chain remained intact. The survey support was substantial. The historical documentation was credible. By the time the ruling was complete, the outcome felt unavoidable. The shoreline parcel belonged to me. The structures built upon it had been constructed on property the HOA did not own. Across the room, expressions changed. Some people stared at the table. Others exchanged quiet looks. Olivia remained completely still. Months earlier she had stood beside the lake describing the future. Now the future looked very different. When the hearing ended, people slowly filed into the hallway. Reporters gathered near the entrance. Attorneys spoke quietly among them.